Hello, my lovely little gemstones. It's Saphira, and today I'm going to be reading Chapter 2 of I Am Creativity, written by myself. Chapter 2, A Battle of Creativity. The specters watched as a bell rang and the timer started counting down. The twins sprinted to their respective towers, creating things out of thin air as they went. As they would expect, Roman's army consisted of knights dressed in shining white armor and various mythical creatures. They couldn't see Remus's side as clearly, but what they could see was eldritch abominations with too many eyes and too many limbs. Patton had curled his knees up to his chest, covering his eyes and peeking through his fingers to block out Remus's creations, which made him sick to his stomach. Virgil and Logan were both leaning forward, fixated on the viewing screens for very different reasons. This is bad, 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 Virgil kept repeating, breaths coming quicker. Logan leaned over and put his hand over Virgil's, tapping out a 4-7-8 rhythm to try and keep him calm. He will be fine, Virgil. He's creativity. He's stronger than any of us are here. This is his domain. I'm confident he will be victorious. His voice was calm, but Virgil knew his heart was racing just as fast as his own. Don't lie to me. You didn't live with Remus, Logan. He's demented. Just look at what he's coming up with. And Roman is doing the same. They both operate on the same rules, Virgil. And one of those is that the imagination is just that. Imaginative. It's not real. A wet roar echoed across the field, as well as a high-pitched laugh from Remus's side of the field. 3 minutes had already passed. Oh God, oh God, oh God! Virgil felt his heart jump into his throat, and he quickly covered his ears and closed his eyes, blocking out all images and trying to keep his own imagination under control. He needed to calm down. Thomas would have a panic attack at this rate, and considering his host wasn't actually doing anything to deserve it, he really didn't want it to come to that. He felt arms around his shoulders and a chin resting on his head. When he opened his eyes, Virgil saw light blue and looked up to see Patton standing behind his chair, hugging him from behind. He was smiling, but his eyes were watering and lip quivering. It's okay, Virgil. Roman's so strong. He'll win this without even a scratch. Patton's voice cracked at the end, and he swallowed and pushed his smile wider. Patton... So don't worry, okay? Remember, he's just as powerful as we think he is. If we believe in him, then he can win. Virgil looked back at the field. 5 minutes left, and there were now dozens of different creations on both sides. He chanced to look at the viewing screen and saw Roman inside his tower, fortifying the doors with metal bars and hulking armored guards. He was concentrating, his tongue poking out of the side of his mouth, but what really confused Virgil was that Roman seemed to be smiling. He looks like he's having fun, Logan remarked calmly. Perhaps we should just sit back and enjoy the fruits of Roman's hard work. Patton sighed, nodding. You're probably right. Virgil's hand shot out and grabbed Patton's before he could return to his own chair. Stay? The anxious side tapped on the chair, and it shifted into a large, plush beanbag more than big enough for two. Patton smiled and plopped down beside Virgil, wrapping a comforting arm around his shoulders. We can cheer him on together. He's an idiot. And you didn't know this before? Deceit sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. I thought that there was a little common sense left in that twisted head of his. I was clearly wrong. Obsession tilted his head, glancing over at the field and surveying the multitudes of disgusting creatures that were standing on Remus's side, growling and slobbering everywhere. And we both know how well you take to being wrong. Deceit glared at him out of the corner of his eye. And you do? I don't sulk in my room for days when I don't get my way. No, you just throw yourself into the next show and fill your brain with garbage. Obsession just laughed, stretching his arms high into the air and laying back on the blanket, blades of grass tickling his arms through the thin material. Just 'cause you don't see the genius in what I do doesn't change the fact that Thomas loves it when I do my job. Unlike someone else I know. He closed his eyes against the bright sun, soaking in the warmth that never made its way into their corner of the mind. Deceit growled and said things Obsession was sure were very pleasant words for him under his breath. Besides, who said you were wrong? What? Have you been paying attention? Have you? Deceit, as much as you love to think you're the only one who can plot and plan, you're not. Deceit stared at his fellow Darkside, unconvinced. When has Remus thought about or planned anything? He does whatever he wants, when he wants. Obsession sighed, rolling his eyes. He propped himself up on one elbow and stared at Deceit. What would you call this, then? The orange-clad side waved towards the field, where they could see Remus ducking behind various barricades and creating new monsters. What's your point? Deceit narrowed his eyes. Obsession shrugged. Just that maybe you shouldn't underestimate him so much. Don't forget, I've known him a lot longer than you have, and I knew him as a kid. Let me tell you, he's a lot smarter than you seem to think he is. If he's so smart, why don't you tell me what he's really planning then? Deceit asked sarcastically, since you can clearly read his mind and all that. What's the point in fighting a battle you know you can't win? Obsession yawned, glancing at the clock. 30 seconds to go. From what he understood, as soon as the timer hit 0, it would be an all-out battle royale. They couldn't create anything past the time, relying only on their current creations. On Remus's side was a huge, fleshy dragon with eyes all over its body, 2 heads and 2 sets of wings curled up on the top of his tower, puffing out black smoke from its nostrils. The rest of his army seemed to follow a similar theme. Nothing that Obsession could see had the correct number of limbs. Roman, on the other hand, had gone with a strength and number strategy. There were hundreds of white knights covering every inch of his side. The side himself was standing on the roof of his tower, head tilted up to watch the timer count down to 0. Maybe winning for Roman and winning for Remus means 2 different things. Before Deceit could ask what he meant by that, a sharp bell rang out over the field, and the real fight began. Looking over the battlefield as the fight began, Roman felt confident. Sure, the monsters his brother had come up with were disgusting, and the dragon on his tower was terrifying, but he outnumbered his brother's army 5-1. They were smaller, yes, but that meant they were faster and quieter, not to mention they could hide. His hand hovered over his own sword hilt, ready to draw it at a moment's notice. He had guards stationed around the tower and within the stairs themselves, but he couldn't trust that to protect him. There was an ear-splitting screech from above him, and he drew his sword just as a multi-headed falcon dived at him, effectively cutting itself in 2 as it attacked. It fell to the ground with a plop and exploded into black dust. Like he was saying, he had to be on guard. He glanced at the screen he'd conjured to monitor his own troops. Most were engaged with monsters triple their size, and there was white dust covering the grass. He pursed his lips as one of the creatures, something that resembled an armadillo if an armadillo had metal plating and was the size of a small house, grabbed one of his knights and threw it into his mouth, chomping down like it was a savory snack. He hoped his friends would be able to handle watching this. Logan would probably find it fascinating, but all of this would be distressing for Patton and Virgil. He only hoped they knew that this was completely fake, if the dust their creations exploded into when they died didn't make that clear. It was no different than a movie. The only person on his team who could feel any pain or get hurt was himself. Maybe that's what they were worried about. Roman tensed as he heard a ferocious roar split the air and saw the 2-headed dragon lift off of Remus's tower. The beat of its wings flattened the grass underneath the tower, and as it took off, the left head unhinged its jaw and sprayed a battalion of his knights with a thick, inky black substance. Ugh, leave it to him, Roman muttered, gagging. Then the right head opened its maw and fire came spilling out. The black liquid covering his knights caught, and within moments they were nothing but dust, mixed with the oil-like substance to create a nasty gray goop. Roman sucked in a breath through his teeth, and then saw the dragon turn its body towards his tower. Nope, 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 he chanted, sprinting to the edge of the tower. Going down the stairs was too slow and too dangerous. Thankfully, the prince knew to always have an alternate escape route. The creative side ran to a parapet where there were thick lengths of vine tied to the stone, dangling all the way to the ground. He grabbed the gloves he'd conjured for this very situation and slipped them on, then swung his leg over the edge and gripped the vine tightly. The dragon flew overhead and nearly blew him away with the strength of its wings, but he held fast. It made another pass as he was sliding down, and more oil spilled out of the left head's mouth. It splattered all over him and steamed on his skin. Worst of all, the oil got onto the vine and underneath his gloves. He started sliding faster, his grip faltering, and as the dragon got ready to torch him, he lost it altogether. Roman landed hard on his back, and his lungs seized at the impact. The prince forced himself to his feet, gasping for air as the oil on the tower was lit up, and he was forced to run to avoid the same fate. He clutched his side as he ran. He didn't think he'd broken a rib, but there certainly would be a nasty bruise. One of many to come, he'd wager. Roman ran to the side of the tower where he'd created a small oasis to house one of his secret weapons. Remus had a wide, manic smile on his face. God, he hadn't had this much fun in forever! He watched the flames consume Roman's tower and sent his dragon after him. He couldn't see which direction his brother had run off in, but that didn't matter too much to a fire-breathing dragon. He'd burn the whole area down if he needed to. He would just return it to normal after the fight. Then he caught something on the wind. A sound floating in the air. A song. He could barely hear it, but Remus noticed that his dragon was shaking its head in confusion, trying to get away from whatever it was hearing. He tried to call it back, but his control had lapsed and it wouldn't listen to him. The creature raged, spewing oil and fire into the sky before crashing against the force field surrounding their arena and exploding into dust. Silence fell over the field, and the twins realized that this round was over, with both left standing. They reconvened in the center, after they cleared their areas of all leftover debris. Remus crossed his arms and looked Roman over smugly. "You've lost your touch. You didn't even manage a single hit on me." Roman huffed, keeping a hand on his hip to try and subtly keep pressure on his side without letting his brother know he was hurt. Neither did you. Are you even trying? That was such a boring round. I nearly fell asleep. Oh, all right, then let's make things quick. 10 minutes, and this time it won't be a warm-up, Remus cheered, pointing at the clock above them and resetting the time, which immediately started counting down. Roman squawked in protest, but Remus just laughed and ran off, leaving the prince standing there with his side aching and the clock ticking down. What are you doing, Princey? Move! He heard Virgil's voice scold him in his head, and that jolted him enough to head back to his own tower, newly reformed, and come up with another plan of attack. He looks tired, Patton said quietly, watching through the screen as Roman went about preparing for the second round. He's holding his side. Do you think he's hurt? He did fall a distance while escaping from the tower. It's possible he injured one or more of his ribs. The moral side let out a strangled cry, cupping his hands over his mouth to try and keep it in. Virgil stared at the back of Logan's head with wide eyes. Logan, do you even care? Of course I do, but Roman did very well in that last round. He ended it with a tie, and now he surely has a better idea of Remus's strategies. Now he's able to incorporate that knowledge into this next round. That's all good in theory, but look at him. He doesn't exactly look like he's up for another fall from the tower. Virgil pointed at the screen where Roman was leaning up against a tree, eyes closed and chest heaving. Creating takes energy, but the same goes for his opponent. I'm sure Remus is just as tired as Roman is. Yeah, but, Logan, he might hurt himself if he's too tired. Can't we just stop this? I doubt either of them would allow that at this point. We simply need to ride it out, so to speak, and provide him support from here. Patton whined, shifting to bury his face against Virgil's neck. Virgil patted his shoulder awkwardly, watching in silence as Roman ducked in and out of view on the screen. Instead of a relatively open field like he'd made before, now he was growing a thick forest with a canopy so thick it cast dark shadows across the creative side's face. What is he doing? Remus literally made a fire-breathing dragon last time. That forest is just going to burn, Virgil said, crossing his arms. As he said it, Roman stumbled and fell to loud gasps. There wasn't sound from their viewing screens, but as the creative side stood back up, they could hear him shouting and cursing in his Disney way as water dripped down his face and his clothes were soaking wet. I believe he's already thought of that, Virgil. Despite himself, the anxious side couldn't help but snicker. Idiot. Remus shifted his weight back and forth, tapping the handle of his morning star impatiently. The time was nearly out, but he hadn't seen his brother emerge from the dense forest he'd created. He cocked his head and the corners of his mouth twitched into a devious grin. So, he wanted to play hide and seek? That was fine with him. He'd just have to smoke him out. The timer hit 0 and the signal blared. Remus raised an arm and shouted, sending his misshapen, vaguely humanoid army running forward. He heard cries of shock and disgust from the sidelines and smirked. They just didn't appreciate the human body in its most natural form. Remus put his fingers to his mouth and let out a shrill whistle, and after a moment the buzz of huge insect wings echoed from behind him. Without even looking, he hopped onto the giant dragonfly and lifted into the air, leading the charge towards the forest. An unstable laugh ripped its way from his chest, and Remus relished this feeling of the adrenaline rushing through his veins and the wind tearing his hair every which way. He pointed down at the center of the forest, and his mount rained fire onto the lush greenery below. The trees caught instantly, and Remus laughed as they turned from green to pure black, fading to dust and ash in the air. His brother was down there somewhere, and he would find him. And finally, there was an explosion, and Remus nearly lost his balance as a geyser erupted right next to him, showering him with freezing water. His dragonfly mount dodged to the side, its wings damp and heavy. He looked down at the forest to see his glorious fire had all but disappeared, drenched by the multiple streams of water that had exploded into the air. Remus sneered. Of course it wouldn't be that easy. He shook his head and let water droplets fly before commanding the dragonfly to hover over the forest, jumping into a tree and climbing down to the forest floor. It was quiet. The Duke took a few steps forward, trying to see around the thick tree trunks. He snickered quietly to himself. That would be a good one for Thomas later. His boot squished into a puddle of something, and Remus lifted his boot to examine it. There was a watery black liquid seeping into his shoe, and the dark side realized that it was the dust of his creations that had mixed with the water from the geyser. He looked around again. What had happened? He'd made his own army fireproof, so they couldn't have burned from him, and there was nothing around here that explained what could have destroyed them. The Duke set his jaw. Well then, maybe his brother was capable of playing a little dirty. He grabbed his morning star and rested it over his shoulder, following the faint buzz of insect wings to find his way out, using his weapon to whack any tree branches or loose brush out of his path. Instead, Remus found his way into a clearing of trees, with a fake mesh of leaves cast over the top to disguise it from above. The trees surrounding the area were twisted together, branches forming a protective barrier to keep people out. But then, it also meant it could keep people in. "Oh, Roman, I know you're here. You're just too predictable," Remus called out, swinging his Morningstar back and forth. "Come on, let's just get this over with. You're clearly not fit to be Thomas's creativity if you're hiding from little old me." There was a laugh from across the clearing, and Remus saw a poorly defined shadow sitting in one of the trees. "I thought you were a little smarter than to just walk into something like this. I mean, come on, Rem. This is obviously a trap." Remus heard a strange creaking from behind him, and a tree branch suddenly snaked its way around his waist and lifted him off the ground. His Morningstar clattered to the ground and he cursed wildly, flailing his legs to no avail. Of course, moving trees! That must have been what the whole forest was made out of. The prince hopped down from the tree and strutted over, hands on his hips and a triumphant smirk on his face. "I can't believe that worked as well as it did. Seriously, I pulled this same trick when we were kids." Remus winced in pain, though he tried to hide it with a wide-toothed smile. "Who says this isn't exactly what I wanted to happen?" Roman rolled his eyes and drew his sword, ready to end this fight. Remus winced again, gritting his teeth. He kicked his feet forward and caught Roman's shoulder, shoving him back. The momentum loosened the branch's hold on his waist, and he dropped out of its grip. The dark side grinned, rolling and grabbing the handle of his Morningstar. Roman stumbled, head snapping up just as Remus swung upwards, uppercutting his chin with the heavy weapon. Warmth blossomed in his mouth as he bit down hard on his cheek and blood poured onto his tongue. Roman fell onto his back, head spinning. He blinked stars out of his vision and was met with a maniacal smile aimed down at him. Remus raised his Morningstar above his head, and Roman willed his leaden limbs to move. He couldn't let this happen. He was Prince Roman. He would not be defeated like this. The prince twisted his entire body, using the momentum to throw his arm up and swipe at Remus with his sword. His grip was terrible, but it would do. Remus jumped back and dropped his weapon behind him, but he wasn't fast enough as the blade's edge ripped through him. Literally, through him. Roman, expecting resistance and finding none, was carried by his momentum and rolled onto his stomach. He pushed himself to his knees and spat red into the grass, staring wide-eyed at his brother. I hit you! That's not fair!" "No, you didn't," Remus laughed, dancing away and laughing. Roman stood slowly, unsteady on his feet and using his sword to stabilize himself. "Yes, I did. How did you do that? My sword went straight through you." Remus shrugged, retrieving his Morningstar. "You didn't hit me, Roman. What can I say?" He smirked, slinging it over his shoulders. The prince shook his head, prodding at his sore chin and checking for blood. "You can say that you cheated." "I didn't cheat. There's nothing in the rules about dodging an attack." "That wasn't dodging. You went full-on ghost mode. I didn't even know we could do that." "You can't," Remus said under his breath. Then he huffed and rolled his eyes. "Fine. If you really think I cheated, we'll call this one a draw. And you know what? I'll even let you take a break. You look like you're ready to crawl into a hole and die." Roman growled, straightening his back despite his body's protest. "Oh yeah? What's the matter? Scared that I'll beat you like this?" Remus just laughed and turned on his heel, waving an arm over the forest around him and making it disappear into dust that glittered in the wind. "Third time's a charm, Roman. But whose charm will it be?" The prince watched his brother dissipate his creations, feeling weight lift from his body as the strain of keeping it up lightened. He sighed in relief, turning to go back to his friends and sit for a moment. "Roman!" worried voices called as he approached the pavilion, and he subtly tried to spit another mouthful of blood into the grass before he got too close. Patton ran up to him, checking over his face and wiping away the blood dripping down his chin with the edge of his cardigan sleeve. "Pat, your sweater." "That's not important. Roman, don't ever do that again. I'm nearly passed out," Patton scolded, though his impact was lessened slightly by the crack in his voice and tears in his eyes. "Is your chest all right? I saw you holding it earlier," Logan asked, stepping forward and pulling Patton away from his fussing calmly. Roman gently prodded the sore spot and nodded, wincing. "Just a bruise. I don't think anything's broken." Not that he would tell them if it was. He had to finish this, but if Patton knew he'd gotten hurt that bad, he'd drag Roman to his room and make him stay there for a week. Logan nodded, not fully convinced. "And your head?" Virgil interjected. "I saw you spit blood, Princey. You're not okay." "Yes, I am. That hit just made me bite my cheek, and it bled a little, okay?" Roman opened his mouth to show them that the bleeding had already stopped. "I'm fine. I just need to sit for a minute, and then I'm going to kick his butt into next week." The other three shared a look. "Roman, you don't have to do this alone. I know I'm not as good with the imagination as you, but if I could just do something to help," Patton pleaded. Roman shook his head, then groaned at the action. No, I can't risk you guys getting hurt. Besides, this is between us. This is what everything's been leading to all these years. It's the only fitting end for the two of us, ever since we were kids." He trailed off. Patton bit his lip, glancing at Logan, who sighed quietly. Virgil looked between the two of them, confused. This is my fight. I appreciate you guys wanting to help me. I do, but this isn't something you can really help with. We need to settle our differences, and this is really the only way we know how. Violence should not be the answer! There is no other answer with Remus. What I need right now is to come up with a plan. A strategy. Logan? The logical side adjusted his glasses, taking in how battered and exhausted Roman looked. He was struggling to even stand. Logan doubted he was up for creating much more. Leave it to me. You hesitated. Remus tilted his head at Obsession, who was staring at him evenly. Whatever do you mean? When you were standing over Roman. You could have finished it right there. But you didn't. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Deceit nodded, eyes narrowed as he tried to search Remus's face for answers he was not going to give. The dark side of creativity threw his head back and laughed. I think you need to get your eyes checked, Obsession. The orange-clad side adjusted his glasses. I may be blind, but I'm not stupid. I know you, Remus, and I know what you're capable of. You're going easy on him. Remus just rolled his eyes and looked over at Deceit with an amused smile. Can you believe him? Have I ever gone easy on anyone? Deceit smiled. I've never seen it before. Tell me, do you have a plan for this round? You know, it's cruel to keep dragging it out like this. Remus pursed his lips and shrugged. I'll just do whatever I feel like. Nothing new, then. Come on now, Obsession and I are getting incredibly bored over here. Can't you do something interesting? Deceit leaned forward, chin in his hand. Remus tapped his morning star against his hand, thinking, but as the other dark sides watched, the handle missed his hand and swung down to the ground. Remus stumbled, planting it on the ground to regain his balance and leaning against it. No, Deceit realized. He didn't miss catching it. It had gone straight through his hand. And now, Remus's face seemed to be glowing. It took a moment to realize that it wasn't his complexion, but rather the sun shining down and somehow through him. Well, I should get back to it. This will be the last round, so you two just sit tight, okay? This'll be quick. Are you sure this is what you want, Remus? Obsession asked quietly. The dark side chuckled, turning away from them. You couldn't have asked me that a bit sooner? It's a little too late to back out now. I'm out of time. We're finishing this now. The creative side turned and shouted to his brother in the pavilion, pointing back at the field with vigor. There was a call back, and Roman started back towards the field. Deceit watched him walk away, Morningstar swinging at Remus's hip and sighed. Looks like you were right. Obsession stifled a snicker. I think I just heard your ego shatter, D. He then grew somber, watching Remus walk away. That was it, wasn't it? The lying side nodded, picking at the edge of his gloves. We're not going to see him after this. He hummed in agreement, pushing up his glasses and rubbing at his eyes. The side glanced at Deceit. You gonna miss him? Deceit smiled. Absolutely not. Liar. The twins agreed on 15 minutes to prepare, and the onlookers noticed a distinct difference between their strategies. As soon as the timer started, Roman had darted onto his own side and into his tower, hiding what he was creating from his brother. Meanwhile, Remus was leisurely wandering around his side, absently growing a wall or creating a gruesome creature every so often. He carried an air of indifference, a change from his eagerness from before. He stood tall, but the dark side sitting on the sidelines knew, perhaps instinctively, that something was off. The former dark side sitting with Logan and Patton noticed it too. While his friend's eyes were glued to the screen, watching Roman put his plan into action, Virgil kept his eyes locked on Deceit and Obsession. He couldn't tell exactly from where he was sitting, but the look on Deceit's face looked almost disappointed? Upset, even? It had to be an act. Virgil had never known the lying side to show his emotions clearly. Had Remus said something during the little break? Deceit's head turned towards the pavilion, and Virgil's head snapped back to the screen, heart racing. Did he know he was being watched? No, it must have just been a coincidence. Still, though, he didn't look back over after that, just in case. Is he gonna make it? Patton's voice brought Virgil back to the present, and he glanced up at the screen. It's going to be close. As long as he followed the structure I set, he should be fine. He should have created his most important pieces first. The rest is additional support. Logan tapped his chin, eyes locked on the screen. 30 seconds left. Roman looked up from his work and clapped his hands, smiling. He's done! Patton cheered, leaping from his seat and throwing his hands in the air. Virgil saw a small smile grow on Logan's face. He's still got to actually do the fight, you know. He's not done yet, Virgil added. Everything will be all right, Virgil, Logan reassured before the bell rang out over the field and they all leaned into the screen. This was it. Roman's chest was heaving. Even though he hadn't created nearly as much as he had the past 2 rounds, his entire body was screaming at him to stop, to let it go and rest. He leaned heavily against the parapet, commanding his knights to march forward onto Remus's side. His brother's side of the field was suspiciously barren. Even with Roman's lack of energy, he'd managed to create dozens more than his brother. Yet the dark creative side wasn't showing any signs of exhaustion or pain that Roman was feeling. He wasn't even barricading himself in his tower. Instead, he wandered around his side of the field casually, his morning star stuck through his belt. Roman kept a careful eye on him as he sent his knights forward, taking out the few monsters blocking the way. The dark side didn't seem worried, and as Roman's front lines advanced, he realized why. An ear-splitting explosion rocked the imagination, and both Roman and the spectators alike slapped their hands to their ears. The only one unbothered was Remus, who merely started laughing as he saw Roman's first line of troops reduced to white dust. The prince's eyes widened. Shit, he had explosives planted? No wonder he didn't have monsters above ground. The real danger was below. His knuckles went white from gripping the stone of the tower. Logan had taken a lot of things into account, but landmines hadn't been one. Roman closed his eyes, willing his army forward. He refused to split them into smaller groups, even though it would mean he would lose less to an explosion. As long as he could just get one group through, that would be enough. Another explosion shook the field, and Roman winced at the puff of white smoke that rose into the air. 2 down. It was fine, he mumbled to himself. His secret weapon was still in play. A grotesque creature that looked to be part snake, part tentacled monster slithered up behind Remus. The dark side glanced back at it for a moment curiously. Roman's heart was racing. Just a little more. Remus turned away as another, smaller explosion shook the ground. As his eyes turned towards the horizon, the monster shifted into one of Roman's white knights holding a morning star high above its head. Even if the dark sides had wanted to warn him, there wasn't a moment to cry out before the knight swung, clocking Remus on the side of his head. Darkseid's eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed onto the ground, unmoving. A bell rang out after a few moments. It was over. Roman had won. The wall around the field dissipated, and the rest of the twins' creations crumbled into dust, leaving Remus curled up on the ground, and Roman bent over, breathing hard but still standing. The Lightsides ran over to him, with Patton tackling Roman in a hug and lifting him off the ground. Roman groaned, his ribs screaming in agony. "Pat, easy, chest!" Patton gasped and let him down, hands moving to grip his arms carefully. "Sorry, kiddo, I'm just so proud of you." That nearly made Roman burst into tears right then and there, and he ducked his head to hide his face. "Thanks, Padre. I did it." "Yeah, you did. Don't do it again," Virgil warned, hands in his pockets. Roman just laughed, slinging an arm around Virgil's shoulders and bringing the anxious side into a one-armed hug. "Aw, you can say you were worried about me, Stormcloud." "Of course I was," Virgil mumbled into his chest, returning the hug quickly before stepping back. Logan put his hand on Roman's shoulder, a rare smile on his face. "Well done, Roman." The creative side blushed. It was high praise from Logan. "Thanks, Teach." "So, does this mean you're Thomas's only creativity now?" Patton glanced over to the other side of the field, where Remus was lying. His voice was quiet. What will happen to him?" Logan pursed his lips. "It will not be good for Thomas to only have good imagination." He put air quotes around the word good. "It will be up to Roman to take over Remus's responsibilities as well as his own." "But Roman's Thomas's good creativity. How is he supposed to do that?" The logical side huffed. "Patton, I've said this before, but things are not that simple. Life is not black and white, and although it might be a difficult task for Roman at the beginning, it will be dangerous for Thomas if he doesn't. Logan, Roman's not going to be able to do that," Virgil piped up. Roman tuned his friends out, eyes darting between the dark side still sitting on their blanket and his brother lying on the ground. Somehow, it didn't surprise him that Deceit and Obsession hadn't moved from their spot, and seemed to not even be bothered that Remus was still unconscious on the ground. Roman huffed and held his head high as he walked over to his brother, who was staring up at the sky with a glassy expression. Roman leaned down and offered him a hand. "Come on, get up." The dark side blinked. "What?" Roman rolled his eyes, reaching down and grabbing his brother's hands, trying to pull him to his feet. "Would you rather lay there and get your outfit dirty? I'm trying to be nice." Remus allowed himself to be pulled into a sitting position, but refused to go any further. "Why?" The light side huffed, hands on his hips. "Because that's what a prince does, got it? It was a close game, and I wanted to thank you. It was fun." Remus blinked. "You thought it was fun?" "Well, not all of it, but, well, it's like you said, old times, right?" Roman scratched the back of his head, looking away as Remus got onto his feet unsteadily. "You fought well." The dark side stared at him, chest heaving. Roman grinned, meeting Remus's incredulous stare. "I can't believe this. You're actually speechless. You haven't stopped talking since you've showed up." "Roman..." He opened his mouth to respond, but Remus suddenly threw his arms tightly around Roman's shoulders, and the prince tensed. "What are you doing? I swear to everything, if you stab me in the back, I will..." A faint laugh echoed in Roman's ear, and Remus tightened his hug. Not this time. After a moment, Roman relaxed and gingerly returned it. After several more tense moments, another whisper, this time so faint Roman barely caught what he said. Take care of Thomas. It took a moment for the words to register in his mind, but as soon as they were uttered, Remus's steadfast grip disappeared completely, and Roman's arms closed in on himself, going straight through the side he'd just embraced. Remus, what? The dark side smirked, stepping back despite Roman's desperate attempts to grab him again. It's time. Have fun being creativity. Then, as if he were just one of Roman's own creations, he disintegrated into shimmering white dust, carried away from Roman's frozen form on a gentle breeze. Remus? Hey, this isn't funny. Get back here. You can't just... That can't be... That's it? All that and you just leave? Remus, show yourself! Roman shouted into empty air, grasping at the dust that floated lazily around him, desperately hoping that his brother would reform if he could just gather it all. His eyes and chest burned. For years he'd been dreaming of this moment when he could finally vanquish the evil within Thomas and bring peace. But this felt nothing like those daydreams where he touted his victory and swore that the other Darksides would be next. He didn't feel happy or excited by this. He felt devastated, his breath starting coming faster until he was hyperventilating. Roman's legs were jelly and he collapsed into a heap on the plush grass. Remus was gone. Half of Thomas's creativity was gone. His brother was gone. As soon as that thought hit him, he found he couldn't hold back the tears any longer, and he sobbed freely, crying and pleading for the world to just please, just bring his annoying, crude, selfish brother back. Patton and Logan sprinted to Roman's side as soon as he collapsed, Patton offering a shoulder to cry on for the distraught prince. Virgil, on the other hand, had a bone to pick. The anxious side stalked over to the tattered blanket where Deceit and Obsession were chatting amongst themselves, as if they were out and about on a stroll, rather than being moments after their supposed comrade and friend was turned to dust. Virgil stopped in front of Deceit, glaring down at him with hate in his eyes. What's wrong with you? Deceit glanced up casually, pursing his lips. I don't know what you mean. I knew you were a cold-hearted bastard, but even you have to feel something about all this. You just lost Remus. He's gone. Why are you just sitting here? Crying and screaming about it isn't going to bring him back, Deceit answered. Besides, Remus knew what he was getting into when he challenged Roman. If anything, he got what he deserved, Obsession added, pushing his glasses up. Virgil's chest was about to explode from rage. Got what he deserved? God damn it, Obsession. I knew he was a cruel asshole, but I thought you were capable of some goddamn empathy. Obsession shrugged. He got what he wanted. I don't see why I should feel sorry for him. Oh, I believe he got even more than what he wanted, if you want my honest opinion. Deceit was smirking now, hand over his heart. Virgil took a step back, suddenly on guard. What do you mean? Obsession gestured behind Virgil. See for yourself. Virgil was loath to turn his back on these two very large threats, but when he heard a scream not of anguish but of pure agony, he whipped around and his blood ran cold. Roman was curled in on himself, hands over his ears, mouth open in a scream that he couldn't force out. Patton tried to touch him, but Roman jerked away as if burned by the touch. Virgil couldn't move until Deceit hissed from behind him. You were just calling us cruel for standing by while our friend died. But look at you. Frozen like a deer in headlights while poor Roman is in absolute agony. That's not a very friend-like thing to do, Virgil. Virgil swallowed nasty words that he wanted to hurl at both of them and took off in a sprint, ignoring the laughter behind him. Roman! The anxious side screamed as he ran, forcing himself to go faster. When he reached the prince, his hands flew to his mouth in shock. On the creative side's pure white back, there was a stain of oily black over his heart, and before Virgil's very eyes it began to spread out, edges blurring as it consumed the creative side entirely. Roman seized, sucking in a breath before his eyes rolled back into his skull, and he crumpled into a heap in Patton's arms, the pain becoming too much. Roman! Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and if you like what you hear and you want to read more, you can find the link to the fic in the description. Otherwise, I will be posting a video next week. See you next time.